Now let's take a look at fiscal and monetary policy, given the working of the model that we just looked at earlier. Okay, so got real GDP on the horizontal axis, got general price level on the vertical axis, got aggregate supply, we have aggregate demand. It's currently sitting at potential. Okay, so this is our GDP star, price level P star. So let's take fiscal policy. Now, what is fiscal policy? Fiscal policy is a change in taxes or a change in government spending, G. Now, when taxes go up, C falls. Okay, so remember our GDP equation. Okay, Y equals, so GDP equals C plus I plus G plus NX. When income taxes rise, people consume less. C falls. That puts a drag on GDP. When G rises, that increases GDP, and vice versa. When taxes fall, consumption rises. When a G falls, GDP falls. Okay, so now typically when the government takes on fiscal policy, it's mostly in order to stimulate economic activity. In other words, they want to decrease taxes in order to increase consumption, or they want to simply increase government spending. Now remember, an increase in government spending can result in the Ricardo-Barrow effect, but we're not going to get into that in here. We're going to assume that that's not applying. So that was something you learned in earlier videos with loanable funds market and stuff, but we're not going to get into that in here. Anyway, so we're just going to assume an increase in GDP, increase in G increases GDP, a decrease in G decreases GDP. So let's assume that for whatever reason, consumer confidence falls. Okay, that's going to decrease. So consumer confidence in the state of the economy or the future, whatever, is going to decrease aggregate demand. That's going to decrease C. Okay, people start consuming less if they think times are getting worse. If the government wants to shift that curve back, because right now we're working toward below potential outcome, right? A new level of GDP would be here and we could go into a recession. So assume that the government wants to reverse that. Well, then they can increase government spending or they can reduce taxes. If they reduce taxes, that will increase C, shift the aggregate demand curve to the right, or they can just increase G, which will do exactly the same thing. The other mechanism, of course, is monetary policy. Okay, so remember, we've got our aggregate demand equation, our GDP equation, which is C plus I plus G plus NX. So let's assume that for some reason, consumer confidence falls, aggregate demand shifts to the left, and GDP is below potential. Well, the Federal Reserve can then jump in. Remember the loanable funds market and the money market? Okay, so the Federal Reserve can jump in. And if we remember the money market in particular, okay, we got money supply, we got money demand. The Federal Reserve can increase the money supply. If they increase the money supply, they lower the interest rate. They lower the interest rate. Okay? Now, lower interest rates means that, okay, what we've effectively had happen now is we get an increase in the quantity of money in circulation. Banks then need to lower their interest rates in order to get people to borrow that money. That means increased investment. Okay? That means increased investment. Okay? And that increase in investment, that also means increase in consumption. People buy more cars, buy more houses, etc. So the lower interest rates increase C and I, I is the real critical component here, because that on aggregate is going to be the driver of low interest rates. Business expansion, that's going to get people employed more, etc. That can shift aggregate demand back to the right. So you've got both fiscal, and that is called monetary policy. So you've got both fiscal policy, which is a change in taxes or a change in G, okay, and that's called fiscal policy. Okay, and you've got monetary policy, which is a change in M, which results in a change in R, which then results in a change in I primarily. Okay, change in I primarily. Okay, but it does change C to some extent. Okay, and this is called monetary policy. Both policies are available if we get some sort of leftward shift in aggregate demand that tries to throw us into recession. We can use either of these two policies to shift that aggregate demand curve back to the right and reduce the negative effect on the economy.